live.
Hi there. So we've just had the morning session of day 11 of the Undercover Policing Inquiry, phase 1 of tranche 2. I'm joined by Rob Evans from The Guardian.
Hello.
I'm not sure how strong the old microphone is.
Yeah.
I often get told off for not being loud enough, so sorry if I shove it in your face.
That's all right.
So what do you think of this? So this morning we've been hearing from HN25, who used the cover name Kevin Douglas, an identity stole from a dead child. Like all the other officers, I always stress this, it wasn't just taking the name, he was taking the entire identity. He went up to Newcastle, walked the streets where the real Kevin Douglas would have grown up, just to understand him more, was deployed into the Troops Out movement. What do you think? What do you think of his evidence this morning?
Well, I think he's definitely one of the least interesting officers that we've had. I don't think he's very loquacious in what he's saying.
That's a very charitable way of putting it. He keeps saying I don't remember, or I can't quite recall. And another one he keeps saying is, as far as I remember it, like couching his answers.
He doesn't. I think there's quite a lot of officers, undercover officers who've turned up, and they sort of they're giving a bare minimum, really, account of what they're saying. I think it's a bit odd. I think the barrister sometimes actually sort of gives him the answer before he, his in the question, which I think is a bit odd. But
and they don't really push a lot. There was a few things he said. There was really an opportunity to push for further questioning, which they didn't take.
No, but there's something very important actually about the inquiry. There's lots of things that are important about the inquiry, but one thing that, although we see it less here, but one thing I do think is important is that a lot of these undercover officers, a lot of the special branch officers, all these police officers, they are sort of, they are true members of the secret state, and I think it's important they are actually. There's a power in the fact that they're brought before us into some sort of a public forum and actually ask questions about what they were doing, because way back when they were undercover, they would have never thought that they would ever actually have been required to answer any of these questions. And I think that's really important, because they, some of the other undercover officers, they've been given quite a grilling on the detail of, you've written this, why did you do that, why were you doing this, and that's important. That is an important part of what. If you go way back in time, if you're taking really the big picture, way back if we go back to. When Mark Kennedy was first, if you go back to 2010, the public knew nothing about this. No. Absolutely nothing. No, nothing at all. And we would never have thought that back in, if you go way back in time to October 2010, that, we would have these officers brought to a public forum to answer questions, all the documents come out, go through them in detail. So I think that's a real... that's an achievement.
Well, we mustn't forget how far we've come, really, right?
I know. I always think that, you've got to think of the bigger picture here. Very few other countries have had such a sort of covert operation examined in detail and exposed in detail, and held, to have so much... examination of what was going on. But if you look at the bigger picture, that's what's happened. We would have never thought, if you rewind time, that all of this would have come out. But I do think it's not an accident this has happened. This has come about because of a lot of hard work by people who were spied on, the women who were deceived. There are lots of people who have contributed.
Occasional journalist as well as telling stories.
I know, but the point is that this has come about. This is a turning of the tables. That's what I really think. Part of what this is about is that the people who were. Sorry, I'm bringing it close because I do think this is important. it's a turning of the tables here. What has happened here is that you have undercover officers, all their managers, who have basically operated in secrecy for decades, committed all sorts of abuses, and actually it was the people who were the targets of those abuses who have, by and large, exposed what's happened. And I think one thing that I think is really interesting is that if you go back in time to Mark Kennedy, it was the woman he deceived into a very long relationship who was actually the motor. It was her detective work who uncovered him. And we shouldn't forget that actually one of the identities and these type of covert operations, they are one of the biggest secrets that the secret state had. And it's the ingenuity of the women who uncovered that. And I think that's really important because, it has meant there's been a real turning of the tables here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was quite telling that one of the things that HN25 said at the beginning of his questionings, that he would have never joined the unit unless he was given the assurances that his cover identity would never be exposed.
Yeah.
It was quite telling that that's exactly what was happening while he was,
Yeah, I mean, secrecy is a big part of what they were doing. And secrecy is so key to what they were doing that, the whole of the undercover operation ran more or less for 40 years without the public really knowing what was going on. And, from 1968 right through to 2010, the public did not really know what was going on. But what's key to that, what I always think is key here, is that if you have people in the secret state who go about thinking that they will never be caught for what they're doing, they commit abuses. And that's what has happened here, because they committed all sorts of abuses. They were deceiving women. They were spying on the grieving families. They were spying on, Stephen Lawrence. They were nicking the identities of the children's of the dead children.
Referred to as dead babies.
In this case, yeah. So, it's just it is part of what the secret state does. They do two things. They want to they want to. If they see they want to go and spy and find out what political groups are up to, but also, if they have no invigilation from outside, they commit abuses. And that's what's happened here. And that's actually why we're sitting in this inquiry, because there were so many abuses that once Mark Kennedy was exposed, there were so many abuses. It was like the dam just broke and it all came tumbling out.
Yeah, absolutely. And we haven't really heard that much in the way of abuses that HN25 committed today, but we have heard a lot of he claimed his reporting was about finding evidence of serious criminality that could be considered support of terrorism. Yet there was absolutely none of that in any of his reports.
Yeah, I mean, I think the nature of it is that I think when I'm not a great expert in this, but I think the reality is that in the IRA ran quite a tight unit, tight operation. They weren't going to, there was never. There are a few cases, but not very many cases of them getting any involvement from people on over here.
No, not at all. Really.
From left-wing activists. I mean, I think the IRA, the impression I have is the IRA actually had a great suspicion of left-wing activists, so they weren't going to say, hey, why don't you come along on our latest bombing mission? So
it's ridiculous, right? It's a ridiculous
idea. I mean,
it's also ridiculous to think that the SDS thought that would be the case as well. I don't really believe,
Yeah, I mean, you could say, I think one of the questions was, it was obvious that they weren't, they say the troops out movement. He accepts. He says, look, they were a non-violent group. So the barrister, the inquiry asked, well, once you had realised that, why didn't you stop the operation? I mean, I think the sharper question actually is, by the late 1980s, shouldn't the special branch in SDS actually have realised that already? You know, because they've been monitoring Irish groups for years.
Well, I mean, they infiltrated the troops at the very beginning. We heard
Yeah.
that in Tranche 1 with Rick Gibson.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. So, I don't know. I mean, I think I thought the one of the most interesting things that he said today was he just there's a bald acceptance. Yes, troops out movement were not violent.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned as well earlier about how like a lot of the questions from the barrister were kind of held within the seed of the answer for him to like. It was a lot of the time he was going and like just agreeing. Oh yeah, I accept that or whatever. It's often very guarded about like kind of don't mention any names, please answer with yes or no questions. And then of course we did have the last 10 minutes of the hearing this morning were under restriction order. We can't say what happened during that time. There's what they call a blurt in the trade, it appears, and like the entire proceedings were shut down, the broadcast was suspended. If you were following, it kind of finished like halfway through a sentence. Just, I mean, on all that, like the way in which the inquiry is run, do you think it's suitable for getting to the kind of truth that we want to find out?
I think one of the most... Inquiries are hard work. I think I hadn't really realised that until I've seen an inquiry hard work, close up. And I also remember, funnily enough, there was a conference on Spycops way back in about 2016.
Crime and Justice one.
Yeah,
I was there,
and I remember someone there, I think was from Ireland actually.
Pat Finucane said, I think I know exactly what you're going to say,
said, look, they are hard work.
He also made the point that the best thing that came out of a public inquiry is a second public inquiry, and the best thing that came out is a third, and the best thing that came out is a fourth, and then you might start getting to some sort of truth.
Yeah, but so if you're... I remember that conference, and it was a bit of an eye-opener because you sort of think, yes, they don't just sort of sit there and disgorge, whatever you want. But things are worth fighting for, and I do think, everyone who's taken part in the inquiry, has achieved from the spy, the people who are spied on side. There's things that are valuable that have come out of the inquiry and have been worth, all that effort in order to extract from the inquiry. And, I can think of, for example, there's a lot of documents. I think that having all those documents out there are important because
most important, I would
argue.
Yeah,
I always think the evidence is actually, really key, because then people can come out and, people out there can sort of have a look at the documents and think, well, find out things, but also they have the chance to challenge things. But I do think, the second side of it is that the people who have given evidence, the civilians, I don't know quite what to call them, but, they've made headway in challenging, a lot of what the police have been saying. And, for example, I think it was last week or the week before, it was a really important moment, I thought, where, Dave Morris gave evidence and challenged Roger Pierce, and Roger Pierce seemed to be the undercover officer who was, he was uncovering bomb plots left, right, and centre. Actually, it was just, who knew?
No one else had heard of.
Yeah, who knew? But actually, Dave got up and challenged him, and Pierce had to sort of back down and say, "Oh, there's no evidence for that."
Fell apart like a cheap suit.
Well, that's right. So, for the people who are spied on, they are getting their message across, I think, and they are challenging the official version. And there's a lot of information that's coming out. And I think that's worth... I think that's really important.
Yeah, I agree. There's more to come today. HN25 was meant to have finished, I think, by now, but it seems like it's going slowly. I imagine we're going to be having him for a bit longer this afternoon.
I think so, yeah. I mean, one thing you do see is that people who are questioned, they often do go a bit longer than they think. But today, in the afternoon is Lindsay German.
Yeah, yeah.
And she's a long-time member of the Socialist Worker Party. Of course, we now know that the Socialist Worker Party, Socialist Workers Party, I think I should say, were the most, they were very heavily infiltrated for many decades. But Lindsay gave good, I listened to her when she gave evidence first time round, and she gave a good account of herself. And, she explained exactly what they were about. She could rebut, evidence that was given by the police. And, I think she did well, personally.
Yeah, I mean, I find it a bit ridiculous that she was called to give evidence in tranche 1 and then has been brought back for tranche 2. I mean, it sort of shows how I mean, we're going to get this again, I think, with some of the undercover officers. I mean, Roger Pierce theoretically will have to come back later because he ends up as a manager. Yeah. Whether he does or not, another matter, of course. But yeah, so we should have more of HN25 and then Lindsay German after that this afternoon. Are we following along as usual? Anything else you want to add?
Well, I just always think about the big picture. I always think, go back to October 2010 and how little was known and how much has come out since then, how much has been achieved, how much we now know. This is really important in my, in my book. How much we now know compared to then is, a monumental achievement by quite a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree entirely on that. Right, thanks for joining us. We'll do another one of these videos at the end. I'm not sure if Rob will join me or it'll be somebody else. But yeah, thanks for joining us, Rob, and see you all again soon. Cheers.